Hey, Curious here. Today I'd like to discuss something that I think is pretty important to understand, and that's certain aspects of the right wing that may be obfuscated by the populist left's view. I like to call this libertarianism for lefties. That's right, that's what I'm saying. Because if you really understand it, you begin to see with all that capitalism, all those huge multi conglomerate factories and all their evil, evil deeds, you certainly see a certain rhyme to the reason when you begin to understand the cause. The cause is very simple, it's individualism. And it's individualism with labor. To create yourself and to have the fruits of your labor come back to you in rewards, in perpetuity. Let's explain some of the way the left does this too. There's a very good example in a number of areas that a certain left winger will understand is anti establishment. Because, in a way, libertarianism is also a representation of that, but from a former time when autocracies and mercantilism ruled. And that was the oligarchism of the time, the rule by the rich, and much more tyrannical than the governments today. Well, comparatively, you know, um, one could argue that point, but that's arguing the past with the future. So that's something to consider also. Basically, there's several areas where left wing views are libertarian. Very much so. One, stripping, sex work. Your body, your right. That's the first thing in libertarianism is you own yourself and you also own your productivity. No one else owns it. No one else has a right to establish rule over you when you're not interfering with someone else. Now, we could debate that part too, but you'd be debating it from a conservative viewpoint. Because, well, unless you're anti sex, so that could be, debating it from an anti uh, um, patriarchal view. And that's what I was going for. But anti exploitation by corporation, you know, and there's the crux of it. One crux of it is on one side you have regulation, and the other you have pro sex positive deregulation. You have somebody who wants to make money. Oh, of course, you can't really say in the modern day that the sex trade, well, what they call the sex trade, and this and that, and all the nuances that go back and forth with these arguments, are deregulated. But essentially, you do work for yourself in most instances. That's one example. Let's talk about another example of libertarianism on left wing ideologies, in the left, so to speak. And that is do it yourself, off the gridders. You go to an area that has a high natural resource, a wilderness. You put in your own time, you put in your own effort, you put in your own utilities to get off the grid, to stop having somebody regulate your views. It seems like the leftists do this, so even though they're environmentalists, they choose to get off the grid. Now, you could debate ecology or environmentalism versus off the gridders, because if everybody got off the grid, that would decimate a lot of wildlife. I don't know. You tell me regulation versus deregulation there. But more than debating these things and pointing a finger and saying, see, you're no different, that's not the point. The point is, I'm trying to give you examples of aspects where left wing viewpoints aren't pointing at the ghosts and goblins of the right and saying, ooh, evil oligarchs. I'm trying to give you representations of views of what individualism and libertarian is. You ever wondered what drives it? These are two examples of what drives it. You want to know another one? Hemp, marijuana. Why, you say the drug war's bad, right? The drug war is very bad. Well, that's an idea of regulation. But even liberals, in the education field, in the health field, in other fields, psychology, people who talk about the horrors of marijuana because it could possibly bring schizophrenia out first, and the mental health field and the health field, and people who say, oh, this is, it's 10 times more carcinogenic than cigarettes, and there's people that are anti-smoking. They're the regulators. You see the theme that's going on here? Regulation versus deregulation. Your body, again, your right. And when you do all that work to sell a product, you are putting, now this is a very important point, your labor into your work, and that's where it becomes an extension of your body. Do you want to know why corporations have personhood? Although I disagree with it, because I'm pro-regulation on corporations. It starts out very small. It starts out with the argument of your labor, and people not telling you what to do with it, and people being responsible for their own selves. People being responsible to drive if they're intoxicated. People being responsible to be productive their own self and not be bailed out. It's not your job to babysit them, is it? You just want to grow your crop and spread the joy of cannabis, right? You want to create hemp. You want to break the oligarchy of cotton. You want to do all these things. Well, that's libertarianism. That's another example. Another example would be, alternative energy is also a couple points in there, both with hemp and biofuel, and with passive energy, solar and wind, from the off-the-gridders. And, I had another good example, but I just, to be honest, I just forgot it. So I hate to just mumble around until I remembered it. But basically, that's basically some of the things that give you an idea of what libertarianism is like. The the feeling that you could do it yourself. The feeling that you can make ornaments and sell them and do all kinds of other things that you have done, that you have put your effort and work in. But the problem is, when you build upon that and it goes into generations after generations, what does it start becoming? A corporation. Again, first it's family owned, and then people buy in, and then other people come to work, drawn in from it, and pretty much you have the beginnings of corporatism. Now, is that wrong? If you had a little town that you were allowed to start, and it could do all these things that other people couldn't, how long until it would build? Until you could grow your own food in hothouses, and you could hunt the land, you know, even though it might be damaging or detrimental to indigenous species there, a very much economic or ecological impact. That's regulation versus deregulation again. And this town grows. It has adequate water. You get to dam up some water. And you get to grow all your crops. You know, oh, I remember the other one. Here's a good one. And you start selling that food. And you brand it as something that is special from this area. That has the I can't think of the word. Sorry. See, talking is a good one too, isn't it? But it has the brand of the exclusiveness. Exclusiveness, because you're selling the product now of being green and all these things you believe in. The hemp, the clothes, the nature, the do-it-yourself, the food. Now, here's another thing that they regulate that you can't do. Food co-ops to break the grocery industry. In other words, you got the right to come in and sell raw milk and other things and put a label on it and sell it. But now, what happens when there's a sickness outbreak? And you're left with several tens or 20 people that are sick from some kind of virus. Does the government have the right to come in and bail you out with free medical health care and stuff? Yes, we don't want people to get sick and stuff, but that's prohibitively expensive. What happened to your, responsibility to do it yourself? No, you want the state to come in and help you. I'm for universal health care, but I realize it's an aspect of regulation. Deregulation is good when it's for you, but it can be a real pickle when you have to pick up the resource slack from something happening, from an incident or a really bad situation where people's lives are threatened because you didn't take the safeguards of regulation. So let's say you get older in this town of Green Glen or something, or Green Valley, this Green Valley paradise, right? That you're selling stuff out of and using the available natural resources to create surplus. And now this town's becoming popular because you have these exemptions. Well, what happens is some people start protesting you because it seems like you're being either exclusive and keeping certain people out, because you want to create a viable workspace that doesn't take people and use them against their will or take advantage of them, or you are using a cheaper labor force and you're not giving the workers rights that you can't afford. Is this starting to, sound like a little dystopian? I hope so. Because that's what we need to consider. How one thing flows into another. It's not the application, it's the scale. Once you start seeing this as a scale between carving wood signs, doing it yourself, and being off the grid versus, Coke Industries, that are spewing garbage with friggin' slums next to them, because if the people want to be responsible, they can move. The starving and sick and ill. And supposedly they could sue, but with their lawyers of the Coke Industries, they can't sue. But there's regulations in there and bending of regulations that allow this. In a free market, there wouldn't be, supposedly. But that's why I'm a progressive economic, because I believe that that bottoms out and tops out on, government, because it gets so powerful that people can't form a consensus, and yet the government can manage to manipulate laws. I agree with you. See, I'm an economic progressive. Because of that reason, you can't low bid public service. But wait a minute, this isn't happening in some evil Texas town. This is happening in your Green Valley, because the fish are running out. The restaurants are being put in. Um, Trash is starting to not get processed like it did. It's getting too expensive. Someone decided there was a place that they could dump it. You know, someone spotted a friggin' poor little friggin' wooded owl. But you already had those trees planted and replaced at no small effort by yourself to freaking start the next generation of wood you need to sell your little knickknacks and custom organic redwood furniture, or oak furniture or something, your mystery teak. I mean, and your little brand of Green Valley organic. This is not pointing at the right and saying bad. That's what I'm trying to get past. But this is not just frigging making apologism for the right either, because if you're going to point a finger at conservatism, to make it effective, you really have to see, like these examples I've given you, how on the left it becomes a sort of cultural mirage. It's a question not of this is good and this is bad, but why this is good and why this is bad. And it becomes a matter of degree and consensus. That's the point. That's extremely the point. Ayn Rand, for example, has been both endeared and reviled by the left and right because of her views. But unfortunately, libertarians, because they were the liberals of their time, they literally are the old libertarians are the old liberals, versus the new liberal of modern day liberals. They were the old liberal, and the old liberalism. That's what it sounds like. That's what I meant to say. And they were fighting aristocracy, mercantilism, and a lot of that injustice that happened in those times. Now things evolved. We don't have the unlimited resources. We realize ecologically that our level of population and the industry we have to maintain it adversely impacts nature that needs a large, a pristine room to grow and support the urban and suburban and rural areas that are being cultivated and used. And pollution is an important problem. Even things as simple as food waste and cow belching, the methane, it can affect the environment. That's how large humanity is now. So we can't really afford to go out into the forest and other things that we used to do. And why we can't is because the population is largely 10 times larger than subsistence living can allow. That means there would be something called the trigger effect. And if we didn't have modern chemicals for fertilizer to put nutrients back in the soil, and the oil industry that runs it, unfortunately, we wouldn't be growing the food to make it happen. I didn't realize this until I found out about center pump drilling. I think that's what it's called. But basically, food, corn, mostly corn, is grown to feed all the cattle that feeds all of us in the horrible conditions, the horrible, horrible conditions they're made to live in because of rotating water spouts that are used from deep drilled holes, and the energy is used to pump that water out to make the grain to feed all of us in our productive in our processed foods from corn, and to feed the livestock to feed us with affordable meat. Unless you want to pay 10 times more uh, for meat, and then no one will be eating that much of it. Now, we could all be eating soy and other things, but you begin to see with a well that is drilled and a circular watering thing that has a tire on the end that waters all this for processing. There's no more straight rows of corn and other things now, and wheat and whatnot. It's all pretty much freaking circular. At least a lot of it is in the main industrial growth. And that's what we use with machinery, mechanized oil run machinery, to pump the water and use the fertilizer to grow these things. Otherwise, we'd end up with dust bowls in 10, 15 years. Even with switching crops, or we'd have a lot of people starving. We can't have people go out and do the farms anymore like that. Well, you could, but you would have a large die-off because they would not be able to afford health care anymore, because our industrial base that takes care, that supplies all the energy and resources to have modern medicine would collapse. You would have, turn of the century medicine because you couldn't afford anything else. And the dangers of people doing subsistence farming are very great. You need cheap antibiotics, at least. Not to mention anything like diabetes or mental health or all of that we take for granted now, because people would have to be out there working in the fields in an agricultural system like that to keep food on their table, or to trade for the little bit of meat and other protein they need to get by, unless it was primarily a vegan or vegetarian type subsistence living, which could be possible, but it's a little bit harsh. There's a lot of things about meat supplying ready protein and energy for labor. So then you get into a situation where you have instances where you could just barely break even ahead, and if there's a famine or plight, there's no way emergency services or all these other things that we take for granted now, or are using on borrowed time because of the environment and oil and depleting oil, cannot be sustained. I mean, are you starting to get the idea about libertarianism now? It's archaic, it's obsolete, but that's the drive towards it, and that's the reason why it doesn't work. Because modern resources are industrial, and that really doesn't equate to the standard of living in a agricultural renewable energy, which was wood and food and trade, wind, for sailing and shipping and back and forth, that these ideas were accumulated in. But that's why a libertarian will give you an issue every time, because all they're seeing is autocracies and oligarchism, even though paradoxically they are the oligarchs. But they're also the people that are in that own their labor. That's why businesses own labor, because, or no, that's why businesses are personhood, because somebody put their labor in it initially. Green Valley Enterprises, all of a sudden has freaking canned factories and cheap labor and smoke and smog and everything else. And it puts a nice picture of what it was like when you first started your business there and got the exemptions to do it. Paradise Lost again. And that's the problem we have to face. That's if I can't express it enough. I mean, it's not about pointing fingers. It's not about this side or that side right. It's about understanding. I mean, you don't have to agree with me. And if you can certainly find a way to debunk what I'm saying, that's fine, because the truth matters more than just my idea of it. But as far as I could tell, and maybe I'm wrong, my idea seems to be an just an ignored truth. And that's just wrong, because it's not really addressing the not impertinent, the imperative arguments that need to be addressed. Right? I don't know. And if the left's not doing this, well, to be honest, who the hell is? Not the right-wingers, because they care about inclusion, not exclusion. They care about they care about exclusion, or inclusiveness, not exclusiveness. I'm sorry, that's right. And if I could have said this in 5 minutes of really sharp wit, who knows? Maybe I'd had a friggin' 100,000 views. So I very poorly represented here. That's another thing. Information, talent. Just like an actor. That's another thing of my body, my right. Versus the industry. Another thing that's wrong. And that's why we get all these problems. I hope that made some sense. I'm sorry for the stuttering and the bad speaking and just the shit show I do as a vlogger, but I hope that's not representative of my thinking, because I'm trying to represent something that it seems to be pertinent, very important. And frankly, just throw my hands up in the air and go, well, I'm not that smart. When it seems relevant to what's really going on, it's just an obfuscation I can't stand. I don't know why anybody isn't addressing this, or maybe I missed something in an argument that brings the argument along to another course that people aren't debating anymore because they've gone past that. I don't know. But this seems important to me, because it seems relevant and pertinent to the situation, to the reality as best as it can be perceived. And I'd like to know, when people are sitting there going, oh, the evil corporations and stuff, who's taking care of these facts? These important things that people should know and consider in making those arguments. I don't know. I stand to be corrected. I only stand to know the truth. Or not the truth, at least the most relevant facts to the situation. I don't care what side. I just want the right side. The better side. Not the right, especially. Yeah, that's enough.